Throughout all theatres of war during the course of the Second World War, from the Far East to Europe and to North Africa, deception was a key way in which the Allies and the Axis sought to gain the advantage over one another. One area of deception saw the construction of dummy sites and equipment such as airfields, factories, truck parks, convoys and even ships out of wood, canvas or even inflatable rubber. Decoy airfields were often populated with dummy aircraft and vehicles of such high quality that even low-flying reconnaissance aircraft with photographic equipment would have a hard time telling the difference between the decoys and the real thing. Decoy airfields and dummy aircraft served several purposes simultaneously. They confused enemy aircraft and hence planners as to the number of aircraft available to the opposing forces as well as to their displacement. They also provided decoy targets for enemy bombers which, if attacked, would prevent real aircraft from being destroyed. Often, the decoy airfields were built in the vicinity of the real airfields, in the path of attacking aircraft in the hope that they would then drop their bombs and strafe the dummies, thereby saving the real aircraft. Perhaps the most notable example of the employment of decoys and of dummy equipment is that associated with the Normandy invasion. If a decoy target did indeed induce attackers to drop their ordnance ineffectively, those that created the decoy would have certainly worn a smug look afterwards. Perhaps the deception would have been the source of much hilarity that night in the pub. If the attackers later learned that they had been duped, they would have felt foolish indeed. Therefore, if a dummy airfield was detected through spies or reconnaissance photographs, it made sense simply to avoid it in favour of the real target, or to ignore it, leading the enemy to continue the ruse and waste the energies of their personnel. For the weary and frustrated pilots and aircrew, a chance to mock the efforts of their enemies would be a source of pride, leading to soaring morale and backslapping camaraderie during pub crawls. One story from the Second World War that is often told and retold by enthusiasts of military history has it that the German forces built a decoy wooden airfield to deceive Allied pilots, and that Allied forces, upon learning of the plot, retaliated by dropping fake wooden bombs as a joke. The story, which has now become entrenched in urban legend, suggests that the German forces took such a length of time to complete the project that Allied reconnaissance pilots had ample time to observe what was happening, take photos of the fake wooden airfield, and to report its construction back to headquarters. The location for the supposed event varies in different accounts. Some state that it occurred on a decoy Luftwaffe airfield near Amsterdam. Others give the location as being in Belgium or France. The legend goes that the Luftwaffe had spent 3 weeks constructing a decoy airfield, complete with wood and canvas aircraft, oil tanks, vehicles, anti-aircraft positions, and other amenities that would be expected at an operational airfield, with the intention of enticing the RAF and US Army Air Force to attack the decoy airfield in error as opposed to the real airfields in the vicinity. During the construction work, an RAF P-51 Mustang reconnaissance aircraft flew low over the airfield and disappeared out of sight, having taken its photographs. 2 days later, the Luftwaffe personnel were reportedly putting the final touches to the airfield when the sound of aircraft engines were heard. From the south of the airfield, 2 de Havilland Mosquito fighter bombers could be seen racing towards the airfield. As the Mosquitoes approached, the Luftwaffe personnel sought shelter in the trees surrounding the airfield. From this place of refuge, they watched as the Mosquitoes circled the airfield once before dropping a bomb which hit the ground with a thump before racing away. Cheers and shouts filled the air as the Mosquitoes peeled away, as the Luftwaffe personnel shouted at the disappearing aircraft that they had been duped. After a few minutes, the Luftwaffe personnel gravitated towards where the bomb had been dropped. It was then that they were confronted with a bitter irony. The joke was in fact on them and not the British, for lying amongst the wood and canvas aircraft was a single wooden log, with a crude wooden fin to resemble a bomb, on which the words had been written, "Wood for wood." After a moment of laughter in which the tension was released, the reality sunk in that all of the work to construct the decoy airfield had been for nothing. From this story, the question abounds as to whether or not this event and other reported events of a similar nature actually took place, or whether they are simply nothing more than urban myth. There exists anecdotal evidence which lends weight to this story and gives credence to the notion that fake bombing raids may well have been carried out by Allied forces on fake German decoys. As far as is known, the wooden bomb story's earliest telling comes from CBS News correspondent William L. Scherer, who wrote of the story in his book Berlin Diary, the Journal of a Foreign Correspondent, 1934 to 1941. Under the diary entry for the 27th of November 1940, Shearer wrote, "X tells me a funny one. He says the British intelligence in Holland is working fine. Both sides in this war have built a number of dummy aerodromes and strewn them with wooden planes. X says the Germans recently completed a very large one near Amsterdam. They lined up more than 100 dummy planes made of wood on the field and wait for the British to come over and bomb them. Next morning, the British did come. They let loose with a lot of bombs. The bombs were made of wood." Shearer did not claim to have witnessed the event, or even to have heard about it directly from any of the participants. He merely repeated a humorous anecdote told to him by an unnamed source. The use of decoy airfields and other make-believe facilities during the Second World War was more than legend, of course. Both the Germans and the Allies engaged in many such ruses, one of the most famous examples being the fictitious 1st US Army Group, or FUSAG, built around General George S. Patton in England to mislead the Germans into believing that the main Allied invasion of France would take place in the Pas-de-Calais rather than on the beaches of Normandy. On occasion, dangerous missions were sometimes undertaken more for their psychological value than for their practical results. One prime example of this is the raid led by General James H. Doolittle against Tokyo in April 1942, which has become known as the Doolittle Raid. Detractors of the wooden bomb story argue that no squadron commander would ever have risked his pilots or his aircraft in such a misadventure. Focusing on Shearer's account, there are several points which place the story more in line with it being a morale-building joke than a historical event. Shearer's diary dates this anecdote to the dark days of 1940, in which the Battle of Britain had just ended and the Blitz was beginning, with Britain standing alone against Germany. Given that the RAF needed all of the aircraft and pilots that it could muster in struggling for the survival of Britain against the German onslaught, sending a number of pilots and aircraft across the Channel on a mission to Holland that had no practical value would have been a tremendous risk. The proposed wooden bomb scheme, relayed earlier in this video, is fraught with possibilities for failure that could easily have rendered it pointless. What if the Germans didn't see the bomb fall from the plane? What if perhaps they watched it fall but didn't know what it was? Or it broke up into unrecognisable pieces when it hit the ground? What if the bomb landed off target and the Germans never found it? And perhaps even, why not send someone along to film the event, thereby greatly increasing its propaganda value? In addition to this, constructing a phony airfield almost entirely from wood would have been a rather extravagant waste of resources. Fake airfields like the one described earlier in this video were intended to deceive those observing them from the air, not to be realistic to ground observers as well. Painted fabric stretched across plywood frames would have served just as well and could have been put together much more easily, cheaply and quickly, and thus would have avoided the supposed delay that provided the Allied photo experts an opportunity to observe the airfield's construction and to report it. One fake wooden bomb, often referred to and pictured online when the myth is discussed, appears to be, upon closer inspection, a Mark IV aircraft fluid light, which was often used by Allied forces such as the US Army Air Force and the Royal Australian Air Force. The Mark IV aircraft fluid light was a smoke-producing flare designed to be dropped by an aircraft over open water for drift sighting during the day or night. The aircraft fluid light was used from the late 1930s and was made by Triumph Explosives Inc., based in Maryland, the United States. The Australian War Memorial website describes the wood and metal item as being shaped like an aircraft bomb and is designed to float on the water surface while giving off a signal light. Aircraft fluid lights were ultimately designed to help find crashed aircraft and pilots. An alternative theory is that the story of the wooden bombs might simply be a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps it was in fact a Mark IV aircraft fluid light that was seen dropping during the reconnaissance or observation missions for tactical support on the ground. The story of the wooden bomb dropped on a wooden airfield is something which has been researched by Jean-Antoine Corabal, who has argued that it was possible that squadron commanders might not have known about the antics of their pilots, or may have turned a blind eye if the bombing of the dummy airfields was combined with the real mission elsewhere. As part of his argument in support of this story, he has put forward an account given to him by Oberleutnant Werner Thiel. Thiel was born in Dillenburg in 1923 and became a lieutenant pilot in the Luftwaffe in 1943. Thiel was detached to the Luftkriegschule Werder, an aerial warfare school near Potsdam. While at the Luftkriegschule, Jill witnessed the dropping of a dozen dummy wooden bombs on a fake wooden airfield. According to Thiel's account, the bombs that were dropped were marked wood for wood. Indeed, Thiel recounted, I was posted in October 1943 at the airfield of Werder, near Berlin. In those days, I also worked at the false aerodrome at WWII that was equipped with a runway. We were living in a kind of container nearby two air raid shelters. These were in fact small bunkers where we could find refuge when the Allies bombed Berlin. At the end of October 1943, the air raid warning alarm went off. We put the lights on from the false runway and moved the decoy planes. Like everyone else, we were afraid of these air raids. We heard the planes flying above us, but this time nothing happened. At dawn, we left our shelter with cautious steps. We dreaded time bombs. We didn't believe what we saw. They bombed us with wooden bombs. 6 to 10 wooden bombs laid on the ground, all painted in white, wood for wood. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more updates, like and share. You can also help to support the channel at Patreon. Details are in the description box below.